Hi gang, the popular image of Space Marines in Warhammer 40k is that of the noble, heroic defender, angels of the Emperor himself, and today's chapter are no exception. A completely codex-compliant chapter, the Exorcists work hard to maintain their prestigious image as glorious defenders of the Imperium, and any rumours of dark magic, strange rituals, and demonic possession are, of course, completely unfounded. The Exorcists chapter are a force of warrior scholars, a peerless Space Marine chapter of visible provenance and strict adherence to the Codex Astartes, whose warriors boast an exemplary record in defending the Imperium against many enemies, particularly the forces of chaos. Their tireless quest for hidden knowledge, working alongside august institutions like the Inquisition, have seen them thwart the machinations of the demonic and corrupted across the galaxy. But while this exemplary record is no facade, their reputation as a loyal Space Marine chapter is at least slightly suspicious, for their methods go far, far further than simply researching the demonic. The Exorcists are, by any inquisitorial definition, radicals, Space Marines dedicated to using the tools of the arch-enemy against itself, masters of 1,000 occult and secret rites, and if anyone ever found out the real reason for their characteristic meditative calm, it's likely the chapter would be declared the darkest of heretics. The exact origin of the chapter and the nature of its founding is shrouded in mystery. It's known that the Exorcists were the only recorded chapter created during the 13th founding of late M35 or early M36, known as the Dark Founding, and their own records hold that they're descended from the line of Rogel Dawn, a successor of the Imperial Fists, though they don't hold close ties to any other Imperial Fist successors, or seem to hold Dawn in any particular high regard in their chapter rites. Any more detail is classified under a bull absolute issued by the inquisitorial representative at the time of their founding. It's unknown how much influence the Inquisition had in the founding of the chapter, but the Exorcists retain exceptionally strong ties to the Ordo, particularly the Ordo Malleus. Outwardly, the chapter is known to be studious, intelligent, and flexible, adaptable and willing to use non-conventional tactics in battle, but otherwise equipped as a standard Codex chapter in the tried and tested vein of the Ultramarine. They retain the standard Codex markings, their armour a deep red, and their symbol is the Calva Daemonium, the horned demon's skull. Their homeworld is the feral world of Banish, a dark and swampy world in the Naramisa Straits, a quarantine sector of space on the eastern fringe. The superstitious tribes of Banish, descended from ancient prospectors of millennia past, see the chapter as the sacred demon bane, servants of the Sky Father who watches over them, and it's this population that serve as the chapter's source of recruits and serfs. Their chapter fortress monastery, the Basilica Malefics, is an ancient and dark, almost medieval fortress of cold stone and dank cells, much of its bulk sited deep underground. Its crown is topped with the eternal pyre, from which the sacred ash is sourced for many of the chapter's rituals. In every way, the chapter is organised along standard lines, a codex chapter since its birth, with considerable fleet elements and a well-balanced complement of standard Astartes equipment, with the one exception being that it has traditionally maintained 12 companies instead of the usual 10, the 9 standard battle and reserve companies, and then 3 companies of scout recruits, a massive pool of initiates for any chapter, but one that is required by their particular specialization and their extremely secret initiation rites. The Exorcists are well known as a chapter that are very specialized in combating the ruinous powers of chaos, particularly enemies of a demonic nature. Their battle brothers are scholars, each an expert in occult lore taken from across the galaxy and gathered in the Grand Librarium of the Basilica Malefics, a vast repository of knowledge gathered over the 4,000 years of the chapter's existence. In fact, the Basilica is a commons source of pilgrimage for members of the Ordos, who study its works alongside the Biblianostes of the chapter, who endlessly research new ways to combat demons under the supervision of the chapter's librarians. Any new aspirant, before they can rise to full members of the chapter, must master the use of all 666 verses of the Ordo Malleus's Liber Exorcismus and study the application of the unicursal hexagrams used to ward their arms and armour from the warp, along with learning by rote numerous dark texts, methods of abjuration and sanctification. In fact, so learned are they in the ways of the demonic that some inquisitors have mistaken them for a successor chapter of the secretive Grey Knights. In reality, their mode of operation is very different. For rather than utilising psychic power against the archenemy like the Grey Knights, the Exorcists' final initiation rites turn them into something that is almost the opposite of that. While the levels of knowledge its recruits must attain is certainly impressive, it's not that requires 2 extra scout companies. Born of one of the chapter's earliest actions, their final, demanding rite of initiation gives them the spiritual strength to use such knowledge, but would see them branded heretic were it actually known. In the first days of the chapter, the Exorcists were deployed to liberate the demon-racked world of Totem 4. The Exorcists were the first to respond to the plea for aid from the populace, but by the time they made planetfall, the planet was already beset by a huge Tzeentchian swarm, led by the greater demon Keriath the Shrouded. But while fighting back the hordes of the Warp, the early chapter proved unusually resilient to corruption, able to cast off demonic influence with relative ease. As the Exorcists advanced across the planet, the greater demon, frustrated at this inability to corrupt the Battle Brothers of the chapter, sought out their leader, the imaginatively named chapter master Enoch Trismegistus, wizards, and forced its essence into his flesh, possessing him and puppeting the chapter master's body, doing great damage to the battle lines of the chapter. However, rather than being overwhelmed by the essence of the demon, the chapter master managed to hang on, retaining a measure of self-awareness even while his body was under demonic control, and learning much about the demon's weaknesses. Eventually, with the help of the librarians of the chapter, Trismegistus was able to cast the demon out and banish it from real space. The consequences of this were huge. A faction known as the Plutonians within the Ordo Malleus had already developed suspicions concerning the chapter's unexplained spiritual resilience, and when this happened, they intervened, interrogating the chapter master relentlessly until eventually they determined his purity, and once that was confirmed, a bargain was struck. The Plutonians' radical beliefs had centered on a theory that limited demonic possession could in fact be used to benefit humanity. Trismegistus, armed with his intimate knowledge of possession, cast this aside, but proposed an alternative that remains to this day, that the Battle Brothers of the chapter, famed for their incorruptibility, endure the same ordeal as he had and armour their soul through temporary, controlled possession. Ever since then, as the final step in their initiation process, after service in the Scout Auxilia, but before the final implantation and raising up to a full Battle Brother, every initiate of the chapter must first be possessed by, and then cast out, a demon of the warp. This sacred and extremely dangerous process, known as Daemonic Possession therapy, is carried out on the bound and restrained initiate with the aid of the chapter librarians in the halls of tempering deep within the Basilica Malefics, and is extremely taxing on the marine involved. Demons, usually minor ones, but you never know, are summoned to invade and violate the aspirant's body in a horrific ordeal that lasts hours. And while the initiation rites are carried out under the strictest supervision, often with a Plutonian member of the Ordo in attendance, ultimately it's the initiate who must exercise themselves and cast the demon out with their own strength of will. If they can't succeed within the sounding of 12 bells, their fate is sealed, and the hapless recruit is either put to death or joins the ranks of the Broken Ones. During the Plutonians' initial horrific experiments, it was found that the Exorcists were also uniquely suited to containing the spirits of demons, and so the gen-enhanced bodies of failed aspirants are used as hosts for powerful demons, trapping them within the material world under lock and key. The surviving broken ones are far too dangerous to keep on banish, and so the failed initiates are transported via tomb-like containment ships to the Purgatomb, a spiritual holding facility the Ordos maintain in the depths of space. Even for the successful initiates, branded with the Calva Demonium, doused in holy water, and after being certified free of corruption, raised to full battle brother, their life will never be the same again. The exorcism of their possession also burns away most of their own soul, leaving the Astartes hollowed out and incomplete, damned in many ways, but also armoured against the taint of the warp. It's difficult to corrupt a soul that no longer exists. The presence of the demonic is never completely gone though. The battle brother will forever be marked by the demon, plagued by echoes of their former never brother, from strange and familiar voices in their head to inexplicable abilities they can never truly shake. Many battle brothers are affected physically by this link to the warp, minor mutations sprouting in the wake of their initiation ordeal, never to be fully purged. Some brothers might find themselves possessed of a brutal rage in combat, or able to taste when people are lying, or discover patches of mottled or scaled skin, claw-like bony growths, fangs or horns, the echoes of their damnation. Of course, all that's hidden by the chapter. It's rare for exorcists to be seen without their armour when fighting alongside other Imperial forces, and their demeanour means that their soulless emptiness and touch of the demonic are often misinterpreted by their allies, who believe the chapter simply cultivate a meditative calm in battle that is mysteriously put aside once they're in close combat. Within the chapter, certain parallel organisations have evolved to deal with the aftermath of such a brutal ordeal. These subcults are known as orisons, secret societies dedicated to particular fields of research and study. The orisons exist across the chapter structure, hundreds of secret cults that Battle Brothers are free to join as they wish, though some of the cults tend to be confined to specific roles or require invitation to attend. The 12-fold commandery, the Convocation of 4, or the Lesser Convocation of 48 are all orisons joined by the chapter's command staff. The Broken Tower contains many of the chapter's librarians. The Obelisk Thelamus is particularly popular amongst heavy support squads, and the Enochian Guard is the ritual orison of the 1st Company Terminator squads, membership of which is dependent on having slain a demon in single combat. Each of these societies has their own secret books of lore, forms of greeting, and sacred rituals, many of which involve the use of limited forms of warp magic or prognostication. They also have their own ranking systems, which results in the Battle Brothers of the chapter frequently carrying secondary titles, such as Brother Initiate, Almoner Captain, or Lector Sergeant. The Orisons, as well as providing focus to the studies of its members, also serve as support networks, allowing the Battle Brothers of the chapter to better cope with the disfigurements, minor corruptions, and temptations that are the lingering result of their temporary possession. The Exorcists are empty vessels, and the rituals and observances, the societies and symbols, are all ways of bringing a thin veneer of meaning to the broken psyches of the chapter. This unique structure and method of recruitment has been adopted into the chapter's combat doctrines that favours extensive intelligence operations to better stay a step ahead of their wily demonic enemies. This is, of course, aided by having 3 companies of infiltrators, and their scout companies are often deployed into the thick of battle, all the better to temper the spirits of their young recruits. Combined with the prognostications of their librarians and the orisons, this allows the Exorcists to concentrate their forces for the greatest possible effect, even going so far as to use their infiltrating companies as lures to draw out the greater strength of the enemy. Of course, despite their proven track record and effective tactics, their strange specialisms cannot be kept entirely secret. While the deeper heresies taken by the chapter are known to none outside the Inquisition, their general level of esoteric knowledge, considered forbidden within much of the Imperium, has seen them come under periodic fire from the ecclesiarchy and those more religious chapters who decry any form of witchcraft, such as the Black Templars. It's only their extreme secrecy, the veneer of studious respectability, the backing of the Ordos, and their exemplary record as defenders of the Imperium that have so far prevented anyone from delving deeper. In 300 M40, the Exorcists were instrumental in pacifying the conflict known as the Ashen War that evolved near the cardinal world of Dimmermar between Imperial, Orc, and Chaos forces. Identifying that the destruction of the Dark Lord who controlled the forces of Chaos in the region would fatally weaken his flock, the Exorcists tracked the demonic leader, known as the Horned God, to the dead world of Belfargo, where their first company, the Enochian Guard, and a strike force of allied Ordo Malleus Inquisitors, fought their way through hordes of cultists and black flaming demons before pinning the Horned God inside an ancient Chaos temple. The first company, their supporting companies, and the allied Inquisitors took heavy losses, holding out in the face of damnation, while almost a third of the chapter were killed, until eventually the venerable dreadnought Cybra was able to rip a chunk from the demon's corporeal form, allowing the librarian Malachite to sever its connection to the mortal plane. But of course, the Exorcists engage all sorts of enemy of the Imperium. During the first appearance of the Tyranids in the 700s M41, the Exorcists fought a fast-paced campaign against a tendril of Hive Fleet Behemoth that had enveloped the agri-world of Stonekral. Far from the frontier of the war, the colonists of Stonekral had resolved themselves to defend against the Genestealer invasion as best they could, but when the Exorcist strike cruiser Hand of Glory was pushed off course by the Shadow in the Warp, and their occultists detected Stonekral's cry for help, the chapter descended to the planet. With clinical efficiency, they set up ambushes and traps to draw out the Genestealers, and their psychic might proved invaluable in stunting the cult's progression and tracking down its broodlord, though the colonists considered the fearful Space Marines to be hardly less terrifying than the alien attackers. The Exorcists were then late entrants into the Badab war campaign, arriving only after the secessionists had been declared excommunicate traitoris by the Inquisition. Arriving piecemeal between 908 and 911 M41, the eventual task force would comprise around half the chapter, the 2nd, 3rd, 5th and 6th companies, half of the 1st company and their 11th scout company, all led by the 3rd company captain Silas Alberic, a colossal warrior in specially adapted warded power armor who held the rank of Keeper of the Vigils. The fleet assets attached to this were considerable: 2 battle barges and 3 strike cruisers along with their escorts, and they proved immediately useful in the loyalist invasion of Sagan, where their planetary assault capabilities were put to great use, while their 2 battle barges proved adept at corralling the secessionist ships. After a brief period serving alongside the Sons of Medusa on Signax, the 2 chapters did not get along well, the Exorcists were spread across the main loyalist battle line, finding additional success in the Endymion cluster, where they took the merchantman Soyuz Maru after a 3-hour boarding action against the Mantis warriors. From that point, as the war reached its final stages, they formed part of the main battle line during the assault on the Badab system. They were linchpins of the initial invasion on the outlying planet of Piraeus, an assault that almost ended in disaster for the loyalists, and they fought alongside the Red Scorpions again during the assault on Badab Primaris' Ring of Steel, destroying the garrison on the Star Fortress of Sentinel Sigma in the face of stiff opposition by Astral Claw's forces under Corian Sumatris. However, a moment of shame came when the Karkaridon chapter impetuously detonated the generators beneath the hive cities of Badab, setting off vast tectonic upheaval that would see the loyalist forces on the surface racing to clear the planet. Now in command of the vast orbital station that guarded Badab, and with confusion reigning on all sides, the Exorcists fired on any ship that could not immediately prove itself part of the loyalist forces, destroying friendly ships as well as enemy ones in the process, a single mark on an otherwise exemplary record in the war. In the latter years of the 41st millennium, the Exorcists have, if anything, become even more active across the Imperium. The chapter fleet were one of the primary Space Marine forces that fought in the Gothic War, and in 970, the 2nd company of the chapter fought alongside Inquisitor Lord Kotiaz during the cleansing of Opridia. The entire strength of the chapter was also deployed during the 3rd Warfare for Armageddon against the orcs of War Garzikal. At the end of the century, the Exorcists fought in the defense of Cadia during Abaddon's initial push during the 13th Black Crusade, and since the emergence of the Great Rift, their companies have been deployed across the galaxy in great demand to combat demonic excursions emerging from the warp, and they were enthusiastic adopters of the technology to create Primaris Space Marines. The initial Torchbearer fleet, tasked with delivering Call's new recruits, suffered significant losses on its way to Banish, demonic assaults wiping out the Grey Shield's complement attached to the fleet. But the technology was eventually delivered, and in testing, the Exorcists and their Plutonian allies found that the Primaris Marines seemed to be just as resilient to possession as their firstborn had been, if even more dulled afterwards. As such, the chapter now functions with all the standard Primaris squad types, including reorganizing its company structure so that its 10th company, known as the Hexbreakers, now functions as a fully Vanguard Primaris company, and the 11th and 12th Scout companies have been expanded to maintain the rate of recruitment required. And with demonic forces constantly spilling from a great break in the universe, it seems likely that the Exorcists are going to continue to be busy for quite some years to come. So that's The Exorcists, a pretty unique chapter, and one that have been through a few changes over the years. They originally appeared, like many chapters, in the very first Badab War article back in 1989 in White Dwarf, where their chapter colours were totally different, based around this bright yellow scheme. There are loads of bright yellow schemes in this, with a big old demon head on the shoulder. And of course, they were then mostly forgotten about for a while, popping up in lists of Space Marine chapters with little more detail, except that by 2000's Third War for Armageddon campaign and 2002's Insignium Astartes book, their colours have been changed to the now familiar red with the Calva Daemonium symbol. Also, the Third War for Armageddon makes the first mention of their dodgy demonic possession rituals, described here in a report from one of the Inquisitors conducting the trials. In 2009, they made a brief appearance in Steve Parker's short story Headhunted about a Deathwatch kill team, which made the original claim that they were successors of the Grey Knights, but that lore didn't remain for long, as in 2011 they were then featured in the second Badab War book from Forge World. And a bit like the Carcharodons, this presents the known history of the Exorcists as a report from historians studying the conflict, so it includes details of the Orisons and the Enochian Guard, but while the usual stuff about demonic possession is definitely implied here, and very obviously intended to be true, officially it's still a dark rumour. But then they're one of the few chapters that actually get continuing lore right up to the present day. In White Dwarf 482, in the revamped Index Astartes series, the chapter are fleshed out a bit. Their story is expanded and presented with, well, a story instead of a series of rumours. Here, we get the original story of Enoch Trismegistus. That's a reference to Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary purported founder of the sort of mystical religion known as Hermeticism. So, an occult wizard. And that article fills us in all the way up to the chapter's response to the rollout of Primaris Marines. Their all-new Vanguard 10th Company is mentioned here, and then they become the focus of Robbie McNiven's Oath of Damnation novel, which brings us all the way up to the present day. So a surprising one in that they're a weird, smaller chapter whose lore has been consistently added to and rationalised over about 30 years, and who are still a pretty big part of the ongoing storyline. And Oaths of Damnation was quite a fun read, so I expect we might be watching them banish demons even more in future. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like to support the channel, why not visit the merch store, where you can declare your allegiance to the Tyrant of Badab with this incredibly good taste tyrannical hat. Or just join the Patreon or YouTube membership scheme, where you get early access to videos, you can ask questions on the book club, or join in with Tale of Four Gamers. Those are all available at different levels. See ya!